Welcome to Mental Performance Unleashed with Emily Heird.
Welcome back to Mental Performance Unleashed with Emily Heird. Emily is a licensed psychotherapist and certified mental performance mastery coach who helps attorneys and legal leaders operate like intellectual athletes, performing at the highest level without burning out. I'm Leanne Lyon, and in today's episode, we are talking about psychological blind spots that can limit performance at the top. As attorneys take on more and more responsibility, feedback tends to decrease, making it harder to see where judgment, decision-making, and leadership may be breaking down. Hi, Emily. It's great to see you as always.
Hi, Leanne. Nice to see you as well.
As attorneys become more senior, what tends to change about the amount and quality of the feedback that they receive?
Yeah, so if we think about the traditional trajectory of someone's career when you are just beginning and a more junior, learning, there's a lot of feedback from people who have been, in your exact seat for a long time, and that's the goal, is to give you the training and the mentoring that you need to develop your skills, master it, and succeed. And then as people climb up the ladder, so to speak, they become partner, or maybe they own their own firm. That feedback starts to decrease. You aren't getting it from people above you, and then those people that were above you are now your peers. So it really kind of disappears as the higher that you get in the performance environment. And so it's not that the attorneys don't care. They still deeply care about their performance and their work. It's just that the feedback infrastructure hasn't changed to give them the amount of quality feedback that might be helpful for them to continue to have strong performance in that environment.
So, at that level, where do blind spots usually show up? Not in legal skill, but in how someone operates day to day.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the patterns that they've developed that work well enough that maybe no one pushes back on them. Or um if like in the hierarchical system of law firms, there tends to be deference to how partners act and behave, and they may not have an awareness of how maybe their communication comes across to other people in the firm. Communication tends to be probably the most common area of where this happens. They aren't aware of how they come across to other people, how their energy impacts the other people in the room. They might become shorter, directness might become more blunt, and confidence can become dismissive. So the more a senior a person gets, sometimes they can become like more aggressive in their communication. Sometimes egos become inflated, which impacts communication. So communication is a major area. Then delegation patterns are another area where blind spots show up. So typically it's on one of two extremes. Either one, a person is hoarding all the work for themselves because they have difficulty letting go of control or trusting other people's work or taking the time to mentor and develop other people. And then on the other extreme end, people can just delegate everything and kind of swing too far in the delegation realm, and they aren't as involved as they need to be on work that carries their name and involves some risk.
So, how does being the person everyone relies on start to create hidden performance costs over time?
This is an excellent question, and a topic I work on with a lot of the leaders that I work with, because on one hand, being a go-to person, being a reliable person, the one who has a lot of roles and responsibilities, it feels good. It feels good to feel needed, to be seen as someone that people can come to and ask questions. But this really impacts the cognitive load and the mental performance, because every time someone is bringing their problem to you or asking you to make a decision when they could make the decision, even if you handle it efficiently, it takes up a portion of your cognitive bandwidth. Oftentimes it comes at a cost of interruption, as we've talked about on other podcasts around distraction control. Um, and so when you are carrying the weight of everyone else's thinking on top of your own, then the quality of your highest level work starts to compress a little bit. And then, we often see how this impacts time management. You feel like you can't get everything done during the day, so then you're working late at night when it's quiet and no one needs you. Um, so those are two main kind of cognitive pieces, and then the third one that I will mention here is like the identity fusion that goes along with this, when the role becomes inseparable from yourself. And this is where, you see yourself primarily like, I am a lawyer, I'm not anything else. And you any sort of feedback that goes against that starts to feel like, or any sort of feedback that you get, I should say, um, feels like a personal threat, because everything about your success and your identity is tied to this one thing. And so that can really start to impact someone's performance when they're at the top, and um, everyone's relying on them. They're carrying the weight of operating the firm. It really starts to their whole entire sense of worth is related to this role.
Yeah, I can see that, especially the identity fusion part. That could be dangerous, especially when it comes later on towards things like retirement or
Yes.
yeah. So, where do high-performing attorneys tend to develop inaccurate self-perception about how effective they are?
Yeah. So there are two ends of this spectrum. One would be the attorney who has an inaccurate perception around self-doubt and humility, where they don't see their strengths and their talents and how much impact they are making, the way that other people do, accurately. So that tends to lead to underconfidence in their performance. The other end of that spectrum is overconfidence, where they kind of become a little lax in preparation, or, oh, I've seen this case a number of times, I know how this is going to go, this is a slam dunk. And so they stop putting as much effort and preparation into the work. And so those are two ends of the spectrum where perception is inaccurate, and it might cost them. Another example of where perception can be inaccurate is when, like, the outcome is good. Maybe they won the case, they got a good result for the client, but the process of how they got there was really expensive. Maybe it was team friction, or how they treated opposing counsel or other people on their team, um, that they think that they're doing a really great job, and the outcome of the case validated that, but there were unnecessary variables that could be eliminated to make things go smoother moving forward.
This happens in many different industries. I know I have experienced this in sales, but what patterns do you see when strong performers start to plateau, even though they're still producing results?
Yeah, so one of the most common patterns I see is, um, they really lose their motivation and their inner drive. Typically, like, I worked with an attorney recently. I'm thinking of this example where he had a vision of building his firm to a certain level, and he made that vision come true. And then burnout started to creep in. And yeah, everything on the surface was going really well. Revenue was strong, leads were strong, the team was strong. But he kind of got a little bit unmoored, I think, and a little bit depressed. There was no fire inside of him, because he hadn't set the vision for what is next. And so part of our work together was to map out and reconnect to defining, all right, what is this next chapter that I want to build? Burnout and depression can come not only when we're working too many hours and have too much stress, but when we are underperforming or when we have lost the joy of the pursuit of the outcome that we're wanting. And so that is a thing that I see often is everything's working on the surface, but internally the experience is kind of miserable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important when you reach a certain level to reach and decide where am I going to grow now? What do I do now that I've achieved this? What's next? It's very important. So, without external feedback, what tends to show up first, which starts to signal that something is off in somebody's performance?
Yeah, so I think what I see most commonly is like in interpersonal friction. So this is going to be, might even be on the home front. There's a little bit more distance with the spouse or uh, kids. The relationship with the kids isn't how you want it to be. There's a little bit more conflict there, or you're more irritable with them than you want to be. Um, Sometimes there's distance from colleagues in the office or more conflict in client relationships, patterns of interaction that aren't going as you intended them to or as maybe they once would have gone. This is like the environment reflecting back that something's going on, but the feedback system isn't catching it. We can also look at team output. So, how well is your team performing? And oftentimes, leaders want to look at the team and attribute underperformance to the team members themselves. But often, we have to look at what is going on with you as a leader first. And everything about you impacts the team's output. So, oftentimes, the team is a mirror of what's going on with the leader. And if the leader isn't delegating, if they aren't creating an environment where mistakes can be made and reviewed and corrected without fear of, being yelled at or being humiliated, then they're going to be more distant from you and not produce like you want them to. So these are some examples of signals that can be happening around you that might indicate that something is off with you when there isn't that feedback system that people start out with when they first start working.
So, what role do structure and systems play in helping high level attorneys catch those blind spots earlier?
Yeah, so I will give two examples of structures and systems that people can use. One is a system that you can use on your own, which is, first of all, to have a mindset of like continuous improvement and growth and striving for excellence. There is like you can't have mastery in your domain, and we want to work towards that, but kind of having a mindset that we never reach the finish line of being the best that we can be. And so having a system to review certain objectives or certain goals that you have on a regular basis to ask questions and reflect. So, you know, maybe it might be something specific like a negotiation or a trial, even if you've tried trials for 20 years, reviewing the tape. What went well? Um, what could have gone better? What did I learn from this? Um, where did I fall short? Kind of having a system, just like athletes review film, and it is continuous improvement for the next game. Or it might be a general reflection around, did I meet my objectives for today? Did I create work on relationships today? Did I do my best to be happy today? Am I spreading positive energy? These types of things. It doesn't always have to be tied to a specific outcome. But if we're constantly reflecting on our own performance in relation to standards or objectives that we have set for ourselves, then that is a system for feedback. The other system is to ask others for feedback. And so this might be at a senior level in a firm, or if you own your own firm, it can go a couple different ways. One is to ask people on your team for feedback, and you have to create an environment where they understand if they give you feedback, you are going to receive it without being defensive and say, thank you for this information. Um, but asking people around you questions like, what is one thing that I do that makes your job easier? What is one thing that I do that makes your job more difficult? If you could give me one piece of advice on how I could be a better leader for you, what would that be? So creating this environment where feedback is a normal thing is one way to solicit it from people underneath you and reveal your blind spots. Another way is to ask your peers, ask people at the same level as you, or even outside of your work environment, but who are very familiar with you, similar questions around to gather some feedback. Because how we see ourselves is different than how others see us or how others experience us. So being willing to hear that information and take it in and course correct if you want to is a valuable way of setting up structure for feedback.
Excellent. And that's where the power of masterminding can so often come into play, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, as we wrap up today, and this is for somebody operating at a high level who wants to keep improving, as many of us do, what's a practical way to actively uncover blind spots in their own performance?
Yeah, so similar thing to activities that I just mentioned on the last answer, having those objectives and doing daily reflection on things. But then to your point, Leanne, joining masterminds, joining groups of like-minded peers, maybe someone who's outside of your organization so they feel it's less risky to give you feedback, and it's an environment where you are actively soliciting it for growth. Again, seeking input from multiple members of your organization. It doesn't have to go to a formal 360 review assessment, which is a comprehensive assessment in and of itself, but just kind of going in and asking people. And sometimes people might be a little bit reluctant to answer that question the first couple times. But if you keep going back and you say, no, I genuinely mean this, I really want to improve, much like, you can always use an athlete example, much like, a quarterback would want to improve their throwing game, or a quarterback would want to improve, how they relate to the team. So you can go back to people if they're reluctant to give you feedback. And then, working with a one-on-one coach, whether that's a coach like me, like a mental performance coach, or an executive coach. There are all kinds of different coaches out there, but we are trained to look for blind spots, kind of illuminate those, have pattern recognition, and help you develop these skills that are going to help your performance.
Well, it is great to have a coach, and Emily, you're amazing. So that is it for today's episode of Mental Performance Unleashed with Emily Heird. To learn more about how Emily helps attorney and legal leaders strengthen their mental performance, go to vantageviewcoaching.com. Take the free mental performance assessment. It takes about 10 minutes, and then book a call with Emily to walk through what it reveals about your performance and receive personalized protocols to start implementing immediately. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review if you found this episode especially helpful, and maybe even share it with somebody else who needs to hear it. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.